Essential Self-Care Podcast, a podcast for those of us who are, let's face it, too busy for self-care. In this podcast, you will hear real life stories from people who leaned into their self-care as they were navigating life's storms. You'll learn practical tips, tools, and strategies to incorporate self-care into your own busy life as well. You'll hear from expert guests sharing their expertise on specific tools and modalities of self-care to optimize your well-being in your life, career, and relationships. I'm your host, Dr. Sheetal Ajmani. I am a physician, best-selling author, and founder of Radiant Living Institute, where I guide high-achieving women to get unstuck and learn to live radiantly again through major life transitions. Quick disclaimer before we dive into the episode, please know that this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. Always seek the advice of your own health practitioner or mental health provider for your specific situation. Now, let's get started. Welcome to another episode of the Essential Self-Care Podcast. I'm really excited today about the guest joining us today. Our guest today is L.M. Stamper. L.M. Stamper helps women over 40 to retire early, who doesn't want that, while also keeping their same lifestyle and not running out of money. He is a fiduciary advisor and holds the RICP designation, which is a specific discipline dedicated to the implementation and maximization of retirement income, as well as legacy planning and tax mitigation. Using a powerful model that begins with education first, Stamp helps his clients move toward a position of financial independence. He is the author of The Power Shift. I have it right here. So if you're watching on YouTube, I'm holding it up. The Power Shift, a women's guide to transforming finances, retirement, and life. And today, Stamp is going to share with us some of his expertise in retirement planning, specifically as it relates to the unique considerations for women. Welcome to the show, Stamp.
Thank you, Sheetal. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited that you're here, and I want to share and just give a little bit of a context for our listeners before we dive into our conversation today, Stamp. So I started this podcast. It's been a year and a half. Yeah, right around a year and a half ago, I started this podcast. And, you know, to be honest, Stamp, from the very beginning, I always had in mind that I wanted to do at least an episode or two or more about finances. You know, this show, it's called Essential Self-Care. And part of the premise of this show is to introduce our listeners and have conversations around some topics of self-care that maybe we don't traditionally think of as self-care. You know, so often people think about like bubble baths and massages and yoga as self-care. And while all of those are parts of self-care, there are a lot of other aspects of self-care of what I would consider essential self-care. And I've been doing a lot of women's health topics recently, so that's part of it as well. And so are our finances. Like if we don't feel comfortable or safe or secure with how we're doing financially, or you know, our sense of financial stability, security, independence, all of those, that can really affect us on so many different levels as well. And just to give a couple of different perspectives, you know, obviously there's, you know, so from the yoga perspective, so I'm a physician, I'm also a certified yoga instructor, and I've studied yoga philosophy extensively. From the yoga perspective, we talk about different energy channels within the body and the root chakra. So the word for that is chakra, these energy centers. And that root chakra is related to that sense of security, stability, rootedness, groundedness. And if we have fear and anxiety around money or finances, well, then that causes imbalance in that root chakra. And you can't really address the other higher levels of energy centers and chakras. So things like your heart center or your throat chakra, your voice, you can't really address all of those higher channels unless those lower ones are addressed first. So like that's part of it. We all know, you know, from the psychological perspective, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And so beyond kind of the basic needs of, you know, food, water, shelter, like basic needs is then, you know, employment, finances, things like that, right? So on so many levels, like this is just so important, and I'm so happy that we connected and that you agreed to come on the show to share a bit more about your wisdom from your wisdom and experience. So specifically today, what I'm really curious about, you specifically work with women in their midlife to plan with their retirement planning. So,
Mhm.
what I'm curious about is what are some of those unique considerations that are specifically unique to women that we
Mhm.
need to take into consideration as we begin to plan for our future, as we begin to plan for retirement, hopefully that early retirement that we mentioned in your introduction. What are some of those unique considerations that we need to know about?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. The question of, why do you work with women? How is it different than working with guys? And the reality is, the number one threat to retirement, this is for most people, but particularly for women, is longevity.
Mhm.
So, you living longer than your money does, if as it were. So we know statistically women live longer than men. We know, obviously that's not always the case, but when we plan for clients, for instance, if it's a married couple, let's say it's opposite sex married couple, we about the same age, we just assume that the male counterpart's probably going to pass early on. And that woman's going to be left alone in retirement anywhere from 3, 5, 10, 15 years, depending on, of course, the health aspects of each individual. So longevity is definitely number one.
Mhm.
Health is typically number two. So healthcare costs, there are certain issues that face men as they get older, and there's certain issues that face women as they get older, particularly from a long-term care perspective. And so those are two, from a cash flow perspective, those are two things that, as you can imagine, longevity, living a long time, having to pay bills for a long time, and then healthcare, either having to pay for healthcare just in general, or having a major health event that you have to contend with. Those are two of the main factors that typically affect women a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think those are really great points. And you mentioned both of those points as well in your book. I'm going to reference your book a bit because I did have the opportunity to read through it before we sat down to record this episode, and those both really stuck out to me as well.
Mhm.
Definitely statistically. Women do live longer statistically, as well as, those healthcare costs and long term care. And, I could say I'm probably one of your ideal clients because I'm in my mid 40s right now.
Okay.
So, and I can say, reading through the book, yeah, I mean, that isn't something that at our age, many of us really think about, like, what are
Never.
those, potential long-term care costs that may need to be considered as we get older, because right now in this stage, we're in such a, and I'm speaking for kind of women in this age range, maybe 40s to 50s, like we're still
Mhm.
so active in our careers,
Mhm.
generally very active in our careers, maybe taking care of our families, maybe in the sandwich generation as well of taking care of
Mhm.
our children as well as our aging parents. And so we're maybe thinking more about, some of those other aspects and maybe not even really thinking as much about how these issues may affect ourselves. And another really important point that you brought up here when you in one of the sections here is how those decisions will also affect our families.
Yes. I'll steal your term, the sandwich generation. That's a very good point. When they talk about the wealth gap or the pay gap, between men and women, obviously we know sometimes that it's just flat out people aren't getting paid what they're worth. But a lot of what people don't understand is that caregiving aspect of things. So what we tend to see is many times a female in the household is usually the primary caregiver, and whether that's for an aging parent or maybe a disabled child or a special needs child, they tend to kind of stand back a little bit, become the caregiver. Therefore, they're not saving for the future. They're not adding money to their social security credits, etc. So it's not always just, the guys are getting paid more than the women, which unfortunately many times that's the case. It's also because women have such a servant heart, which is needed because us guys are kind of knuckleheads. It's another reason why I typically work with women. People ask that all the time. But because of that caregiving and that servant's heart that a woman typically has, they just don't have the career earnings, that their male counterparts do. So we have to make up for that gap as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Which then, affects like the career earnings, which then could affect And I'm literally drawing from your book. So please
But
help
hey,
fill in.
no,
So please
no
help fill in the
complaints.
gaps. So please help fill in the gaps from what I'm saying.
Plug away.
So, I mean, with that gender pay gap, which is still very, very much prevalent, I mean,
Mhm.
I can speak, I've seen statistics as well for, um, I'm a physician, statistics for
Mhm.
physicians where female physicians and male physicians in the exact same role
Yeah,
are making a significant
yes.
significantly different amount in terms of what they are being paid. And
Yeah,
so, I think all across the board, that is still a very real factor. Hopefully that will
absolutely.
begin to change, but it's still a very real factor. And so that combined with also, yes, as women, we may, and again, some of this may be shifting as well, right? As some males take on some, sort of stay-at-home father roles,
Mhm.
things like that. So some of this is beginning to shift, but still generally, I think statistically, women are taking more of those caregiving roles, whether that's
Yeah,
while also working full-time or maybe transitioning part-time or temporarily taking a sabbatical from their career to focus on their family. Again, whether that's their children or their aging parents or aging in-laws,
yeah,
right? I see it in all of those scenarios. So all of those things can contribute to this perhaps lower lifetime earnings,
yeah.
um, which then could also lead to potentially, and please fill in the gaps here,
Mhm.
of lower amounts that maybe we are contributing to our retirement accounts or are
Yeah,
able to, or that are going towards Social Security benefits.
yeah.
And I realize I'm sounding like I am so
You sound
knowledgeable
like
in
a
this.
pro.
And it is 100%
I
because I
think you
just
could
finished
change
this book.
careers. You got a career in finance.
I think, like 2 days ago, before I read this book, I do not think I would be able to speak on this as intelligently as I am right now. So that is, yes, yet again, another plug for his book, which we will share information at the end about where you can find that. But yes, please, I'd love for you to fill in some of those gaps about what I shared with that, with the lifetime earnings, and then maybe how
Yeah,
that affects our contributions for our retirement savings, Social Security benefits, that sort of thing. I would love for you to fill in some of those gaps for me.
yeah, yeah. That's a great point. I'll try to. I'll keep it simple. I won't nerd out on you too much. But if you think about it, when a person starts working, they get out of college, if they go to college or not. But they generally start working in their early 20s. And that's when you start to build your nest egg. And wherever you're working, if you have a 401k or if you're a good saver and you save outside of work, you're going to start doing that from your 20s and your 30s and your 40s. And I think most people know that starting early and letting that money compound over time is one of the best ways to grow that asset. And so when you have breaks in that growth, meaning I started at 20, maybe I got married at 25, 26, had my first kid at 28, and I decided to stay home. Well, I stayed home from 28 to 35. What happened in just that time frame? Well, I wasn't contributing to any accounts. Maybe the stuff I contributed to was still growing in the background, but I'm not adding to that bucket of money. Secondarily, to the Social Security conversation, your Social Security check is going to be based on lifetime earnings. And there's a calculation. And I think most people in their 30s and 40s don't pay attention to it till you get into your 50s and 60s. You really start looking at those statements. But once you look at that statement, it'll show you every year how much you earned every single year in that year. And that's going to dictate the size of your Social Security check. So any breaks in employment, any breaks in contributions, just essentially means that your nest egg and your Social Security is just going to be smaller than it otherwise would have.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
again, that lots of times, and it's not just for women, but many times, especially when we talk about kids, in my own scenario, when my wife had our daughter, she didn't work for about 2.5, 3 years almost. And so, case in point, that's 3 years of no contributions. So it typically lands, in the laps of women, but it obviously happens with men too. But it typically lands, in the laps of women in that scenario.
yeah, and another point that came to me as you were sharing that is, you mentioned that just in the scenario that you presented, that many people may start their earnings in their early 20s. A lot of my listeners are women who have uh, obtained graduate degrees or
Mm-hmm.
other physicians who have, in addition to achieving doctorate degree then went on to residency as well. So didn't really start their full income potential until maybe their early 30s
Yeah.
at the earliest.
Yep.
So that already is, and then maybe, with graduate school or, a doctorate degree, additional student loans as well.
Yeah.
So all of those as contributing factors as well. And so all the more reason to, really educate ourselves. And that's why I wanted to have you on the show, to really educate ourselves about our finances and how to optimize them. Something else that I really that really stuck out to me when I was going through your book that I enjoyed taking a look at, and I know that this would be something that definitely would warrant further individual guidance and consultation, but just something that I thought was interesting was that you did also share briefly in the book some different scenarios that would affect people, whether they are married, divorced, widowed, and also caregivers. So just kind of addressing these different situations. And there were some things in there, just kind of as you were going through different sort of asset classes and things like that, of that I just didn't know, right? And so again, I think this is another reason that it's so important to meet with an advisor such as yourself, because you have all that information and are able to like guide us through that. But I just thought that was interesting that there are these different scenarios, right? Depending on, whether you're married, divorced, widowed, and caregiving as well. Is there anything sort of generally that you'd be able to share about that? Quick shout out to today's sponsor, Reclaim Your Radiance, Radiant Living Institute's signature coaching program designed to help you reclaim your worth, renew your energy, and restore your happiness in your life, career, and relationships. This 6-module curriculum has already helped countless women rediscover themselves through life's storms. From setting difficult boundaries within toxic relationships to finding their inner strength and power while navigating divorce and co-parenting, to aligning their career and business with their authentic self, and to learning how to live for themselves again after their kids have left the nest. This program has been a guiding force for women to live unapologetically and shine brightly within their lives once again, or often, even for the first time ever. Experience the results for yourself. Head over to radiantlivinginstitute.com/reclaim your radiance to learn more and get started.
Yeah, I will. I think the widowed one is a big one because taxes, that's one thing. If a person talks to me long enough, I'm eventually going to start talking about taxes, because I think it's just one of the greatest eroders of wealth. You may get 10% in the stock market, but if you have to pay 2-3%, in value in taxes, you're really not getting 10. But that said, one thing that trips a lot of people up, and this is again specific to women, if men typically pass early on, before women do, then when you talk about doing your taxes, how would that affect me now that I'm suddenly single, if you will? So when people do their taxes and they're married, typically they're going to do married filing jointly. And there's a special bracket that Uncle Sam has when you earn a certain amount of income and you file married filing jointly. Let's just say for simple math, it's $100,000 is what's coming into the household for this couple. They're going to fall in a specific bracket. But once one of the spouses passes away, that next year when you're doing your tax return, you're now doing it as head of household, single, etc. That's an entirely different bracket. And it's not a favorable bracket. So one thing that's kind of shocking for people, whether they're divorced and this happens, a lot of people are getting divorced in their 60s, or there's a widowed situation, is that next year's tax return or tax due is much higher because they're now in a new bracket because they don't have that other person to lean on. And so that's a really big and important thing, because if you know that, then that allows you to kind of position your assets in such a way that maybe the tax bite won't matter. I'm a big Roth IRA guy. That I think a lot of people have heard that. Most people kind of know what it is. But, Roth IRA is just simply something you can, a vehicle you can put money into, it can grow, and you can pull it out tax-free. Well, tax-free vehicles, you don't have to worry about brackets, right? It doesn't matter if it's married filing jointly or single. It doesn't matter if taxes are 45% or 10%. If it's tax free, it's tax free. So, but that is a curveball that a lot of people don't really expect, especially people in retirement, and they lose that spouse, and then the next year they're dealing with that. Again, it's something that most people just don't have on their radar.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. And I'm so glad that you brought that up because, when faced with that situation, you're already dealing with so much just emotionally. Your entire lifestyle has changed with the loss
Hmm.
of this person who has been such a big part of your life, likely for many, many, many years. And so, perhaps one of the last things you're thinking about is how this is going to hit your taxes the upcoming
Yeah.
year. So
Yeah.
having someone on your side to guide you through this process, and I do remember reading a bit about that in your book as well with the Roth conversion strategy,
Hmm.
just kind of planning, getting ahead of it, and planning ahead for it. And again, that strategy may or may not be appropriate for everyone. Obviously speak to your own tax advisor
Please do.
about those unique situations. That being said, another thing that you highlighted in the book was what to even look for in a
Hmm.
financial advisor. So if you're
Yeah.
like, okay, this conversation is resonating with me, I don't know much about this, I am in this age bracket, I think I should start thinking about this. How do I even find a financial advisor? Someone who I feel like I'm going to be able to trust and who's going to give me
Hmm.
advice that I can count on. Like, how do I do that? What are some advice that you have for that? What should we look for?
Yeah. So the funny thing is, find somebody you like. First and foremost, like you need to just at least like the person. With retirement planning, especially, if you're in your 50s and you're getting ready and you're ramping it up and you want to get ahead of the curve, or if you're 65 and you're retiring tomorrow, you're going to be with that advisor for quite some time. If we always plan as if clients are going to live to 100, unless there's like specifically a medical issue that we have on the table. But if not, if you and I meet at 55, the idea should be that you'll probably know me for the next 45 years. And so you're going to want to like that person. So I say, regardless of, credentials, and I'll get into the whole, making sure they're credible and trustworthy. But before you get into that, because that's easy to do, I think, these days, this day and age, there's so much information on the internet. You can find out if you're dealing with a credible, legitimate individual. But I think it starts with just liking that person, making sure you have the personality that fits. We talk with clients. I get referrals all the time, and sometimes those first meetings end in, we're probably not a good fit, and that's okay. That's okay. I like to have a little bit of fun. I like to be serious. There's a mixture there, and I tell people all the time, I kind of work with anyone and everyone, that's in my target market, as long as you're nice and you're coachable and you're fun. It's that works for me, but that doesn't resonate for everyone, right? Maybe my personal style isn't a good fit. So that's the first thing. Just make sure you like the person. Outside of that, there are different databases that you can go to. So one of the best ones is easy is Broker Check. So Broker Check is a database for advisors, and if they have any kind of disclosures, lawsuits, etc., it'll show up on that. So that'd be one thing. Two, do a Google search. I tell people all the time, Google LM Stamper. And I've worked really hard to pretty much own that front page of Google when it as it relates to just my name, and you can see things there. People have Google reviews. Look at their Facebook, look at their LinkedIn. Another thing is, don't be afraid to ask for, do you have a current client or two or three clients that will vouch for you? Can I reach out to somebody that you're currently working with and ask them a few questions? I have no problem doing that. I think most advisors shouldn't have a problem doing that. But between liking the person, doing a little bit of cyber stalking on the person, asking for their current client referrals, I think from there you can get a pretty good fit, whether or not it's a good match.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I think you brought up a really good point of the fact that this is a long relationship,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
Because, if
yeah.
you're starting in your 40s or 50s, right, this is going to be a long relationship. And so you want to make sure that you like the person and that you're doing your due diligence. So I
Mhm.
love those tips and strategies that you gave us for that. Now, you work specifically with with this group, this population
Yeah.
that we're talking about today. And
Hmm.
so, can you share with us, with our listeners, if they want to learn more about you and the work that you're doing? Well, first of all, you just said we could Google search you, but
Yeah.
also more specifically, how can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing and perhaps get their hands on this book?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So in this day and age, I tell people that the best way to probably, if you're in a crunch, just Google LM Stamper, and from there you'll see my Facebook, my LinkedIn. But if you go to lmstamper.com, that's my website. That's usually an easy way for somebody just to reach out. Um, LinkedIn, again, LinkedIn, Facebook, those are good avenues. And I do most of, you had asked this earlier offline. We do most of our meetings via Zoom. And so even though our main office is in the Dallas Fort Worth office or in Dallas Fort Worth area, I'm considered a virtual advisor. So we have clients all over the nation. And so it's very common for somebody to say, "Hey, I went to your website, I went to your LinkedIn page, shoot me a message." And then from there, we just hop on a Zoom and or a quick phone call. That's usually what I suggest, see if there's any synergy there. But the easiest is just go to lmstamper.com. And then from there, if you're interested in the book, you let me know. We're just launching that campaign. We actually have a Facebook campaign that will be launching soon. So if you can't get it through that campaign, it's always easy just to reach out to me.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. And I will include all of those links in the show notes below, as well as you had mentioned, you do offer kind of an intro call just to see if there's any synergy.
Mhm.
So wherever you're at listening to this, like Stamp said, he does work with clients, yes, within the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area, but as well as other parts of the country as well. So I'll include that link as well in the show notes if anyone wants to just book a quick call with you to see if there's any synergy there, as well as your website and the other links that you mentioned. Thank you again so much for being here and for sharing your experience and expertise with us.
Well, thank you, Shito. I very much appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Essential Self-Care Podcast. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe, leave a positive review, and share this episode with someone you know. And remember, your free guide, 6 simple yet powerful steps to create your radiant life, is waiting for you at radiantlivinginstitute.com. Download it today.